That was my channel for a better part of the year, but now that I'm self-isolating, quarantining myself, I got nothing but time. So when the world basically completely imploded, Shota and I were in the middle of the UK, actually northern UK, visiting some friends, and yeah, we thought it might be a good time to start trying to head back to Japan, mostly because the entire country had entered a lockdown. But you know, we contacted our flight, which we couldn't get in touch with for the entire day. They never got back to us. Eventually we had to go to the airport. We had to talk to someone at the desk at the airport because they didn't have a desk for our actual flight company. It was shared with a bunch of other companies. And that's when we learned that our flight had just been canceled. No email notifications had been sent out, no kind of notifications of any kind. So we had to change our tickets, but then they charged us for changing the ticket because apparently it was just more expensive magically. Lucky us, I guess. But we did get our ticket, and then we were able to fly back to Japan the following week, 2 days later than our original return date. So we actually had to wait longer. So we had to get another Airbnb, spend more money trying to eat, and yeah, that was rough. But we made it back, and we thought from here out, it'll be well-informed, smooth sailing. We thought. On the date that we arrived back in Japan, the government had declared that anyone arriving to Japan after a certain date, it was the 25th of March, anyone returning to Japan would have to enter self-isolation for 14 days to make sure, to try and prevent the spread of the virus, which is a solid plan. I guess where this kind of all starts to fall apart is when we all landed in the airport. Basically, there's just a group of us all coming from different flights from around the world. There were people, it looked like, especially on our flight, because we flew from the UK to the Netherlands and then back to Japan. So there were people that actually had one more flight trying to go to China or trying to go to Korea. So they went actually from Europe to Japan, and then they were going to their next flight to Korea or to China. So all of us from who knows where in Europe were kind of crammed into the hall, going down into immigration, where they made us fill out a paper form with shared pins about where we had been, if we had been in contact with anyone that had been infected, and where we would be in Japan. On this paper, it basically said, hi, you need to stay wherever you're going for 14 days. Don't use public transportation. Don't go out. You have to stay in this location for 14 days. Other than all of the obvious problems with that entire situation, I would say that the biggest problem with this sheet of paper is the fact that this whole staying home thing is more of a voluntary kind of question. Are you planning to do this kind of thing? It wasn't mandatory, and the paper wasn't like a permission slip basically to give your job and be like, hey, I can't go out. It was more like, hey, the government is saying that I shouldn't go out. Is that okay with you guys, kind of thing? And that's basically what ended up happening for Shota, because his job kept saying, well, the government's not shutting anything down, so are you coming to work? And then he's basically trying to explain to them, look, I have to be in quarantine because I might be carrying a virus. He works with old people, mind you, and they're still like, well, technically you don't have to stay home. Do you feel sick? Do you have a temperature? Well, you don't sound sick. And they just kept kind of like questioning his resolve to stay home and quarantine himself. And I'm just like, could you not do that? Like, it's hard enough in Japan to just not go to work. Like, it's hard enough to get a holiday. It's hard enough to use your paid holidays in Japan. So when it comes to situations like these where the language used is very fuzzy and it's all suggestive and it's not necessarily mandatory, some companies really try to just be the least cooperative they can. And unfortunately, in Shota's case, that is what ended up happening. They were like, well, since you are deciding to stay home, we're not going to pay you because this is your decision. And you have to tell us that you're making this decision to stay home. And he's like, I'm not making this decision. This is like kind of what should be done. It's kind of what the government is suggesting I do. And they had this back and forth for a while. But yeah, in the end, they basically said, we are not going to pay you. Deal with it. And that sucks. I would say that's a pretty shitty thing to do. So needless to say, he's thinking about changing his job again. So as you can see, our difficulties really started basically as soon as we landed, mainly with coordinating with our jobs because we both do work. Luckily, my job was able to put me on paid leave, which means I get 60% of what I usually make. In Shota's case, he got nothing. And that really made him feel uncomfortable and it made him feel bad. And adding on top of that, having to quarantine yourself and not being able to go out, it was like a rough 2 days at first. Now he's fine, but it was a rough 2 days. He did also try to contact, I believe, one of the government agencies. I want to say it was the employment office or one of the welfare offices to see if he could enroll in like a government program to receive some kind of, not compensation, but they call it teate in Japanese. So some kind of allowance for the period of time that he couldn't work. They basically kind of gave him the run around and were like, you should try calling this number. And then he would call that number and they'd be like, you should try calling this other number. And he'd call another number. And they'd like, we don't know what you're talking about. Are you sure that person gave you the right number? And eventually he got to someone that was like, so do you want a loan? We can give you a loan. And he's like, no, I don't want a loan. Why do I have to take out a loan? And like, it was very frustrating. And I guess that was kind of a sign that Japan is not, they just have no like measures, no steps in place. And when it comes to addressing people affected by the virus and not necessarily physically affected, just affected in terms of like job situation, the government has no kind of plan in place whatsoever at all. One of the biggest differences that kind of ended up being a challenge for us in terms of returning to Japan and having to go into self-isolation and how we were going to manage that, I would say is the whole idea of social distancing, because it's not really talked about. There are commercials on TV. I have seen a few commercials where they're like, these are the things you should do to prevent the spread of the virus. But people themselves are not really practicing it. So, for example, the day we came back, I had to go to the ATM to take my paycheck out of one bank account and deposit it into my main bank account because I don't get my paycheck direct deposited. That is not my choice or my decision. That is just how it is. Extra work for me, but whatever, cool. So I had to go deposit my paycheck. I'm standing by the ATM, keeping a distance from the door, trying to keep the distance from people around me. And basically this old lady's in there. She does her thing. She leaves. I go in after her. She's very nice, very cordial. I do my thing and then I leave. When I'm leaving the ATM, the old lady pops up behind me and she's like, oh my God, it's so cute. And she grabs my hair and I'm like, oh my God, no, please no. I don't want to infect this old lady. So I'm trying as much as I can to just like back away from her without making her feel like it's her. I mean, obviously there's also the whole concept of like personal space, which actually doesn't exist in Japan. People will get real close to you for no reason. But yeah, she's like holding onto my hair and she's like, oh my God, it's so cute. Where are you from? And she starts asking me all these questions, like all up in my face. And I'm just like trying not to answer because I don't want to accidentally spew virus on this woman's face. And so I try to make excuses and I'm like, oh, my husband's over there. I gotta go. My husband's over there. And she's like, oh, okay, sorry, bye. And she like skips off and I'm just like, I literally just landed in this country and I have already just been in extreme close quarters with someone, and now I feel terrible. So we hurried home, isolated ourselves, and that's what we've been trying to do. Of course, when we have to go out and get food, we try to pick times where the supermarket should be less empty, but also because children are not in school, the children just hang out in supermarkets now. There's also people just kind of, I don't know, they look like they were wandering aimlessly in the supermarket. Some of them didn't have carts. They would just be walking around, I guess, killing time and stuff, which is kind of frustrating because it's like, if you are not shopping for food in the supermarket, what are you doing here? Why are you here? But I guess people need someplace to go. I don't know. So yeah, we try to avoid the people in the supermarket, try to always go through like empty aisles and stuff. But then when it comes to like getting in line for stuff, there is no social distancing at all, which is so different from what was going on in the UK while we were there during the lockdown. You know, there's tape on the floor every 1.5 meters, I think it was. And they were like, yes, please stand on the tape. Please don't stand close to people. Please try to give space. And everyone was very, very much aware that they should be taking all of these precautionary steps. Where in Japan, it's just like, people know it's happening, but it's not happening to them directly. So no one is actually doing anything themselves other than wearing the mask. But people always wear masks, so that doesn't help them become more aware of the virus. That's just something that they do every day anyway. So, and I guess that leads to like the biggest challenge when it comes to existing in this atmosphere in Japan specifically. No one is taking it as seriously as other countries. It is so jarring when you come from countries that were under strict lockdown and are taking all these, I don't want to say extreme because extreme makes it sound bad, but taking all these taking all these extra steps to try and keep people safe and away from each other. We're like, here, they talk about it on TV, and even though the news is talking about it all the time, it doesn't seem to really connect with people's daily lives. So you don't see people really taking in those steps in their daily lives so much. And I don't know why there's a disconnect. But it probably has to do with low testing and then low numbers of people that are infected. So when people see the low numbers, that's the laundry. He's selling something from his car. Yesterday it was someone selling the sticks to hang your laundry on outside. Yeah, it's loud. Walls are thin here. Anyway, yeah, people don't really take it as seriously as they should. And so when you are trying your best to take it seriously and try to take all these steps, it is just very hard to do so. I would say another challenge to self-isolation in Japan is the lack of concrete government guidance. And then you put that together with the variety TV show format that is used often to disseminate information in Japan. So these variety TV shows usually have to set up the information in an entertaining way, and that could often take away from the seriousness of the situation. And then you have some variety TV shows that are always trying to push a certain angle of a story, whether it's like a pro-nationalist kind of angle, which is very common, or it's usually just a pro-nationalist kind of angle that's common. So for example, in one of the TV shows that I was watching about the virus, they were commenting on how other countries were handling, how other governments were handling the situation going into lockdown. And they're like, oh, well, this isn't really effective, and we don't think this is gonna work for Japan, and we have to take care of our businesses. And they're really just kind of digging their heads deeper into the sand. And I guess they're hoping like maybe we're just lucky and we'll just get through it magically without any problems, which I really hope, I hope is the case, and so that we just don't have as many casualties. But then they would only prove their crazy ideas right, and then it could lead to more problems in the future. So then I kind of hope that they get proven wrong so that they actually have to rethink some of the things they say and maybe take into account that when other countries do it, they should take notes and like maybe take steps. But yeah, because of these talking heads that put out all this conflicting information or these conflicting points of view, and then you have the government that's not really giving any kind of information, no clear rules. The government's not telling people, like the central government. Tokyo has had the governor, Koike, try to tell people to stay inside, and she's been really stern about it. But then you have the TV programs go out and interview people, and they're like, yeah, well, you know, it makes no sense that I have to go to work, but I can't go to a bar. That's not fair. Or you have a young person that's like, well, you know, sometimes I just want to go to karaoke, and if I want to go to karaoke, I'm going to go to karaoke. Like, that's what some of these people have said about why they're out after Koike asked them to stay home. So you can see how a combination of all this is really not good. And it's making it difficult for people that even choose to self-isolate, because now they have to explain themselves, because, you know, other people will be like, well, it's not a government mandate. Why are you staying home? You don't have to. Why don't you, then you get peer pressure, which is very common in Japan. It really is like a perfect storm of issues and problems. So now, what is next for Japan? The number of cases in Tokyo has been increasing a lot. The last I heard, I think it was for Sunday, it might have been for Saturday, but they had 140 something new cases that had been recorded. And then they were also saying that the 850 beds that had been prepared in Tokyo were now all full. So they didn't have any more beds ready for COVID cases. And one of the complaints that I've heard a lot about this whole bed situation is that a lot of the people taking up the beds only have very light symptoms, and they're not treating these people at home. They're letting these people stay in the hospital for the duration of the illness, which can be very long. And then these people with these light symptoms are taking up beds for people with more, how do you say? For people with more serious symptoms. So you have all of these beds, most of them filled up with people. I don't know if it's most, I don't know the actual ratio number, because I don't believe any of the TV programs I watched showed it, which that was probably a good idea, because if most of those beds are being taken up by people with just like a light cough and a fever, that's crazy. Those people should be at home. They should be treating themselves at home. But the way the testing system works in Japan is you call the COVID center, they tell you where to go. You go there, you get tested, and I guess if it's positive, you just have to stay there, but I don't think you get the results same day. So I'm assuming you're still going home. You get the results if they're positive. And then I guess people are going back to the hospital to get treatment at the hospital. But if you were already home and you got the positive notification, you should just stay home. They could just send you the medicine and you could treat yourself at home. But that's not what they're doing. They're treating everyone at the hospital, so they've run out of beds. And now a lot of TV programs are talking about what happens when the healthcare system falls apart. That's a big topic. And yeah, instead of suggesting a lockdown, people are all just like, oh, you should just, take more care, wear more masks, and wash your hands more. And I'm just like, we've passed that point probably in Japan. We've probably way past it, because this virus has essentially been floating around Japan since February, actually since late January, I think, is when some of the first reports of the infection. The people weren't tested positive until February, but they had been in contact people that were positive in late January. So you had people from late January carrying the virus to Japan. Who knows how many people are actually infected now, because they don't test as often, and people are also asymptomatic. So it's all a big mystery. And for me, that's very concerning. I would really prefer that they just test as much as they can, so we know exactly how many people have it, And then you could make a concrete like lockdown plan. It's like, look, half of the city got it, so this city's got to go into lockdown. But if you don't test nobody, you don't know. So where we are today, it's April 6th. There is going to be an announcement made by Abe, who is the Prime Minister of Japan. He's going to be making an announcement. Apparently, he's preparing to make an announcement. He's going to make a pre-announcement for the announcement. Japanese Twitter is like, what does this even mean? Please just give us concrete information. And so we're all just kind of waiting at this point. I don't know, he might have given it already. I've been upstairs in my office space. This is my office space where my books are. I kind of stopped watching Japanese TV and Japanese news just because it's not giving me enough information, and because I'm not getting enough information, it's making me feel worse. So I cut off Japanese news. I only look at Twitter like a few times a day because otherwise I get overloaded. And I'm really just focusing on my freelance work, the little bit that I have, and actually I've been hanging out with my friends in the States that are in quarantine now. So we've been like chatting on Discord and playing games online together. So in that sense, this quarantine has been very good for me. I've been able to reconnect with friends from high school, and it's been very nice. But for Japan, yeah, I don't think it's going so well. So yeah, when this announcement comes, whenever it comes, whatever they announce, I'm pretty sure that businesses are gonna keep functioning as normal. They're gonna stay open. So that means that I will probably be back at work this Friday, because that's when my quarantine ends.